Welcome to the Maybe Not So Great Books channel, You Decide. This is Lesson 10 of 14. Investment is sacrifice, not greed, from Basic Economics, a common sense guide to the economy, 5th edition, by Thomas Sowell.
The sidewalk artist said, 20 years and 5 minutes. What investment have you made in the last 20 years that no one sees when they look at your work today?
Okay, that quote right there, 20 years and 5 minutes. It lands like a punchline, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's got that perfectly witty, almost movie script feel to it. But for what we're doing in this deep dive, that one line is doing so much work. I mean, it's basically the entire concept of economics packed into a single comeback.
It is. And I think, before we really dive in, we should probably set the stage. Because the word investment, it makes people's eyes glaze over.
Immediately.
Yeah, think of Wall Street, you think of, stocks and bonds, tickers scrolling at the bottom of a news channel.
Guys in suits shouting into phones.
Exactly. All this jargon that feels completely and totally disconnected from, regular life. It feels like a different planet.
It feels cold. It feels like it's just about moving numbers around on a screen to make more numbers appear. Like a game you're not invited to and probably wouldn't understand anyway.
Right. But what Thomas Sowell is arguing in this whole section, this lesson 10, is that we have to strip all of that away. We need to forget the dollar signs for a minute.
Just for a minute.
Just for a minute. And get to the human core of what investment really, truly is.
So what's our mission then for this deep dive?
Yeah.
What's the one big idea we're trying to prove?
The mission is to prove that investment isn't about greed. It's not about money magically appearing out of thin air. It is, at its most fundamental level, about sacrifice.
Sacrifice.
It's about giving up real, tangible things today, things you could be enjoying this very second.
A vacation, a new TV, a nice dinner.
All of it. Giving that up so you can have more real, tangible things tomorrow.
It's delayed gratification, but on a huge scale, like a societal scale.
Precisely. And this is where, all the controversy starts. It's where the arguments begin. Because the returns on investment, the profits, the interest checks, the dividends, they get labeled by critics as unearned income.
Right. The idea that someone's just sitting on a yacht collecting checks while other people do the actual work.
Yes, that's the image. But so Well's whole point is that view completely misses the first half of the story. It ignores the timeline. Those returns aren't unearned. They are the delayed reward for the risk someone took and for the capital, human or physical, that they built up over time.
So if you don't see the sacrifice that happened 10, 20 years ago, you can't possibly understand the economy today.
You can't. You'll get the answer wrong every single time.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're obviously going to start with that Greenwich Village artist. We're going to really break down that story because understanding the tourist's anger is key.
It's a very common kind of anger.
It is. Then we're going to jump to the garage origins of companies like Hewlett-Packard to sort of bust this myth that you need to be a millionaire to invest.
The sweat equity part of it.
Exactly. From there, we'll get into something a bit heavier, the historical tragedy of the middleman. It's a really fascinating and, frankly, disturbing look at what happens when a society decides to punish investment.
A cautionary tale for sure.
And then finally, we'll bring it all home. We'll connect it directly to you, the listener, and talk about things like student loans as a form of human capital investment.
It's a big agenda, and it's going to challenge a lot of very deep-seated feelings we all have about what's fair.
It definitely does. So let's start there. Let's go back to Greenwich Village. I love this story because I think every single one of us has been that tourist.
Oh, absolutely. We've all had that moment of sticker shock where you think, for that, no way.
Yeah, so let's paint the picture. You're a tourist, you're wandering around New York City, beautiful day, you see a sidewalk artist and you think, you know what, I want a souvenir, something unique.
So you sit down, the artist pulls out a sketch pad, some charcoal. He looks at you for a moment.
And then he just goes. The hand is a blur. It's confident, it's fast, there are no mistakes, no erasing. It looks completely effortless, like magic.
And in 5 minutes, maybe less, he's done. He tears the sheet off the pad, hands it to you, and it's you. It's perfect. He's captured your likeness brilliantly.
And you're thrilled. You're looking at this thing thinking, this is amazing. What a talent. You're smiling. You're reaching for your wallet.
Until he tells you the price.
And he says, that'll be $100.
And the smile just vanishes from your face.
It evaporates. And you say, $100? Are you kidding me? That's outrageous. It only took you 5 minutes.
You start doing the math in your head.
Oh yeah, that's $20 a minute. That's
Yeah.
$1,200 an hour. That's more than my doctor makes. This is a total ripoff.
And the artist, completely calm, doesn't even flinch. He just looks at you and delivers the line.
20 years and 5 minutes.
Boom. And that right there is the entire lesson. The tourist is making a classic economic error. He's judging the value based only on the visible part of the labor.
The 5 minutes he was sitting in the chair.
The part he could see with his own eyes. But the artist isn't charging for the 5 minutes of drawing. He's charging for the 20 years of practice that made the 5 minutes possible.
Let's dig into that 20 years part, though.
Right.
Because practice is a nice word, but what does it mean in economic terms? What did that artist actually give up?
That's the key. The word is sacrifice. For 20 years, that artist could have been doing a million other things. He could have been watching movies.
Could have been going on dates, hanging out with friends.
He could have been sleeping in. More importantly, he could have been working a normal, steady job with a regular paycheck.
Right. A job that paid him right away, but maybe didn't build this specific rare skill.
Exactly. So he sacrificed immediate consumption. He sacrificed leisure. He sacrificed guaranteed income. All of that was poured into building a skill. Economists have a name for that skill. They call it human capital.
So it's an asset. It's just like a factory machine, but it's inside his brain and his hands.
It is an asset. And he paid for it. He don't pay for it with money. He paid for it with time, with decades of his life. So when that tourist pays the $100, he's not paying for the paper and the charcoals. He's reimbursing the artist for a tiny fraction of those 2 decades of unpaid invisible work.
It's like an iceberg, right? You only see the little tip sticking out of the water. That's the 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But the massive, gigantic block of ice underneath that supports it, that's the 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's totally invisible to the customer.
And because it's invisible, it's so easy to resent the price. That's the psychological trap. If you don't stop and think about the 20 years, the $100 feels like a ripoff. It feels unfair.
But, and this is the crucial part, if you take away that $100 payment, what happens? If society decides, no, you can only charge for the 5 minutes of labor we can see.
And he never would have bothered practicing for 20 years in the first place. Why would he?
And then the tourist gets no sketch. Or he gets a really, really bad sketch from some guy who just started yesterday.
Exactly. The return, that $100, is the economic signal that encourages the sacrifice. It's the pot of gold at the end of the marathon. If you take away the pot of gold, nobody bothers to run the marathon.
This brings us to a really important distinction Sowell makes. And it's a hard one to wrap your head around at first. He says we need to stop thinking about money.
Yes. This is one of the biggest mental hurdles in economics. He says, and I'm paraphrasing here, money is just an artificial device to get real things done.
An artificial device.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds crazy when, my landlord demands money for rent and the grocery store wants money for food. It feels very real to me.
Of course it does. But think about it on a national scale. Let's say the government just decided to print $100 trillion tomorrow and drop it out of airplanes.
It's raining money.
Raining money. Would we suddenly have more houses, more cars, more food in the stores?
No. We'd have the exact same amount of stuff. We just have a whole lot of worthless paper, and a loaf of bread would cost $1 billion.
Precisely. The amount of real things, the physical goods and services, doesn't change just because the amount of money changes. You can't eat money. You can't build a house out of $100 bills.
So Sowell is saying we have to look past the money and see the actual resources. The wood, the steel, the labor, the knowledge.
And from that perspective, investment is the sacrificing of real things today.
Okay, can you give us an analogy to make that more visceral? Because real resources can still sound a little abstract.
The best analogy, the one that really gets to the heart of the sacrifice, is the subsistence farmer. Imagine a farmer, thousands of years ago. All he has is the corn he grows. At the end of the harvest, he's got a big pile of corn. That's it. That's his entire wealth for the year.
So he's staring at this pile of corn, and he has a choice.
A very serious choice. He's hungry. His family is hungry. They've been working hard all season. His first instinct is to take all that corn, grind it up, make a huge feast, and just be full and happy for a while.
That's consumption.
That's consumption, using your resources to satisfy your immediate wants and needs.
But if he eats all the corn,
Then he's got nothing left to plant for next year's crop, and next winter he starves. It's as simple as that.
So to survive, he has to take some of that corn that his stomach is screaming for right now. And instead of eating it, he has to go throw it in the dirt.
He has to bury his food. He has to literally take food out of his own mouth and his children's mouths today in the hope of having more food tomorrow. That corn that he puts in the ground, that is capital. It is a real asset being used not for consumption, but for future production. And the hunger he feels while he's waiting for it to grow, that is the real physical cost of investment.
That makes it so much clearer. In our modern economy, we don't feel that hunger when we put money in a 401k.
No, it's abstracted away. You just see a number go down in one account and up in another.
But the principle is the same. When I put $100 into a retirement account, I am the farmer, not eating some of his corn. I'm refusing to spend that $100 on a concert ticket or a new pair of shoes today.
You're delaying consumption. You're letting someone else, a business, an entrepreneur, use that purchasing power to go buy steel and hire a worker to build a factory. You're letting them plant the corn for you in exchange for a share of the future harvest.
So, okay, if investment is just sacrifice, that leads to a really common misconception. A lot of us think you have to be rich to invest. You hear capital and you think, well, I don't have $1 million, so I guess that's not for me.
The myth of capital as cash. And Sowell just demolishes this idea. He argues that, yes, financial capital is helpful, it's a great tool, but it is not the rarest or most important resource in an economy.
Money isn't the scarcest thing. I mean, that feels wrong. For most of us, money feels like the only scarce thing.
Laughs, it does. But relative to a truly brilliant idea, relative to insight, money is everywhere. There are literally trillions of dollars in banks and investment funds all over the world desperately looking for a good idea to fund.
So the bottleneck isn't the money. The bottleneck is the genius.
The bottleneck is the knowledge and the insight. Sowell has a great quote on this. He says, "Capital is always available under capitalism, but knowledge and insights are rare and precious under any economic system."
Knowledge and insights are rare. That is such a powerful idea because it flips the whole thing on its head. It suggests that if you have the truly great idea, the money will eventually find you.
Or, and this is maybe even more important, you don't even need the money to start. You can build the value with your own effort first, with sweat equity.
This is where Sowell brings in that whole parade of historical examples, right? The Hall of Fame of humble beginnings.
Yes, and it's so important because we look at these giant corporations today and we just assume they were born that way, that they were always massive and powerful.
Okay, let's go through them. First on the list, Hewlett-Packard, HP.
A giant of Silicon Valley. You think of this sprawling corporate campus. But Sowell reminds us it didn't start there. It started in a one-car garage in Palo Alto, a borrowed garage at that.
They didn't have a huge venture capital check.
They had an idea for a new kind of audio oscillator, and they had their own time and their own brains. Their investment was the hours they spent after their day jobs, tinkering, failing, trying again. The sacrifice was sleep.
Okay, next up, Thomas Edison.
This one is just staggering. We think of Edison as this larger-than-life figure, the Wizard of Menlo Park, the guy who basically founded General Electric.
A titan of industry.
You'd assume he had the best education money could buy. But Sowell points out he had only 3 months of formal schooling.
3 months?
Yeah.
That's less than a single semester.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? He didn't have a fancy degree. His investment wasn't tuition. His investment was the 10,000 times he tried and failed to make a light bulb. It was working as a telegraph operator at night so he could read and run experiments during the day. He sacrificed a normal life for his work.
And then there are the Wright brothers.
Bicycle mechanics, not aeronautical engineers with government grants. And this is the part of the story Sowell emphasizes. At the exact same time, the Smithsonian Institution was also trying to build a flying machine.
And they had everything, right? They had the government funding, the top scientists with all the credentials.
They had the money, they had the prestige, they had the official backing, and they failed spectacularly. Their big attempt crashed right into the Potomac River.
Meanwhile, 2 guys who fix flat tires.
2 guys who fix flat tires in Dayton, Ohio, succeeded. Why? Because they were investing their own money from the bike shop. They were risking their own lives in those test flights. They had skin in the game, they had the insight, and the capital was just enough to fuel that insight.
And the last one, who might be the most powerful example of this, is Henry Ford.
Henry Ford, the man who put the world on wheels. You'd think he came from money, from a family of industrialists.
No, he was a farm boy. And Sowell tells this story of him walking 8 miles to Detroit to find a job.
He didn't have an inheritance. He had a good pair of shoes and the willingness to work grueling hours as an apprentice to learn everything he could about engines. His initial capital was calluses on his hands.
So what's the common thread here? Why does Sowell keep hammering this point with all these stories?
He's trying to show us what investment really is at its root. It's not writing a check. It's the willingness to sacrifice your present for a possible future. All these figures, they started with human capital, their ideas, and their willingness to work, and they sacrifice their time, their comfort, their safety.
And here's the so what
Yeah.
for the rest of us, right?
Yeah.
It's not just that Henry Ford got rich. That's not the important part of the story.
No, and that is the critical leap people often fail to make. They see the billionaire and they feel resentment. But Sowell forces you to ask, what value was created for everyone else?
Because Edison sacrificed his sleep, we got the light bulb.
Because Ford walked those 8 miles and obsessed over the assembly line, the average family could suddenly afford a car. The enormous wealth that they earned was the incentive that unlocked those world-changing innovations for all of society.
It's the artist again. If you don't let the artist charge the $100 for the sketch, he never puts in the 20 years of practice and nobody gets a sketch.
The return is the fuel for the sacrifice. You cut off the return, you cut off the sacrifice, and then innovation just stops.
Okay, so we've established that investment is sacrifice, and it can start with nothing more than an idea and hard work. But we're not living in 1903 anymore. We have a massive, complex financial system.
The boring stuff.
Laughs, right? The boring stuff. So if investment is just the farmer saving his corn, why do we need banks? Why do we need Wall Street and venture capitalists? Why can't I just stick my savings under my mattress?
You certainly can, but your mattress is a terrible investor. It doesn't know where the next Henry Ford is, and that's where financial institutions come in. Sowell explains their primary function with one word.
Aggregation.
Aggregation, like bringing things together.
Exactly. Go back to the farmer. He can save his own corn to plant his own field. That's simple. But what happens when you have a complex economy? You have 1 million people who have each saved just a little bit of corn, a few $100s in their savings account.
And on the other side, you have a would-be entrepreneur who has a brilliant idea for a new factory, but she needs a mountain of corn to build it.
Right, and the savers don't know the entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur can't possibly go door to door asking 1 million people for $100 each. That's the gap.
So the bank is the bridge. The bank is the bridge. It aggregates all those little pools of savings. Think of them as raindrops. One raindrop can't do much. But a bank builds a dam, collects billions of raindrops, and creates a massive reservoir of capital.
And then they can open the floodgates to power the turbine.
They can channel that capital to the Edisons and the Fords who have the insight but lack the resources. The bank acts as the great matchmaker between the millions who are willing to sacrifice a little and the few who have the vision to build something big.
But Sowell also gives a really stark example of what happens when that process is blocked. When you have the savings, you have the entrepreneurs, but something stands in the middle and stops the connection.
Yes, he uses this incredible story from India, the story of the Tata family.
This was just jaw-dropping to read. So today, the Tata Group is this gigantic, respected global company. They own Jaguar Land Rover, they're in steel, they're in software, everything.
A huge success story. But Sowell takes us back to a very different era in India, the period between roughly 1960 and 1989.
This was the time of the license rush.
Yes. It was an era of extreme central planning and government bureaucracy. The government's philosophy was that they had to control the economy to prevent, greed and chaos. So if you wanted to start a new business or even expand an existing one, you needed to get a license, a permission slip from a government bureaucrat.
And the Tata family, they wanted to invest. They had the capital, they had the expertise, they had plans to build factories for trucks, for chemicals, for all sorts of things people needed.
And the numbers that Sowell cites are just mind-boggling. During this 30-year period, the Tata family submitted 119 separate, detailed proposals to the government to either start or expand a business.
119 plans to create jobs, make products, and grow the economy.
And the vast majority of them just ended up in the trash. They were either officially rejected or more often just snarled in bureaucratic limbo forever.
Think about the invisible cost of that. It's not just that the Tata family didn't make a profit on those ventures.
No, that's the smallest part of it. The real cost was borne by the entire Indian economy. It was the millions of jobs that were never created, the life-saving medicines that were never produced, the trucks that were never built to bring food to market. The capital the Tatas had ready to invest was blocked from ever becoming production.
And the proof that the bureaucracy was the problem comes from what happened next.
The turnaround.
Yes. In 1991, India hit a massive financial crisis. Their old system had failed. They were basically forced to change course. So they began to liberalize the economy. They tore down the license raj.
They opened the doors, and the result was immediate and dramatic. Sowell points out that foreign investment in India jumped from about $150 million a year to over $3 billion a year.
A 20-fold increase almost overnight.
The money was always there, waiting. The global sacrifice was available. The Indian entrepreneurs were there, waiting. The bureaucracy was the dam holding it all back. When they broke the dam, the capital flowed in, and India's economic growth rate tripled.
So the lesson is just incredibly clear. When you block investment, whether it's through red tape or high taxes or outright prohibition, you are not saving your society from greedy capitalists. You are condemning it to poverty.
You're telling the farmer he's not allowed to plant his corn. And eventually, he either eats it all or he moves to a farm where he's allowed to plant.
This all leads us directly into the elephant in the room, the big moral debate. Because even if someone understands all this, logically, there's still that gut feeling for so many people that making money from money is somehow wrong.
The unearned income fallacy, it's a very powerful and very natural intuition.
It is. I mean, if I work on an assembly line for 8 hours, I go home, my back hurts, I'm covered in grease, I get a paycheck, that feels earned. But if I own a share of the factory and I get a dividend check in the mail while I'm on vacation, that feels unearned.
The visible effort versus the invisible contribution. We're wired to respect the person we can see sweating, but Sowell argues this is a fundamental failure to understand the dimension of time.
Okay, unpack that. How is this a problem of time?
It goes right back to the artist. The tourist only sees the 5 minutes of sketching. He's blind to the 20 years of practice that came before. The person receiving that dividend check is like the artist finishing the sketch. The sacrifice was done in the past.
The sacrifice was earning that money in the first place and then not spending it.
Exactly. That investor worked a job, earned an income, and then instead of consuming it, instead of buying the fancy car or the big vacation, they chose to risk it. They put it into that factory. They provided the corn that allowed the factory to buy its machines and pay its workers. The dividend isn't a gift. It's the delayed payment for that past sacrifice and for the ongoing risk that the factory might go bankrupt tomorrow.
So when people call for confiscating those returns, Sowell would say they are essentially demanding to retroactively steal that past labor.
Yes. And even more damaging, you're sending a clear message to everyone else. Don't bother sacrificing in the future. Why would you practice for 20 years if you're not allowed to charge for it? Why would you save and invest your money if any return you make will just be taken away?
And this isn't just a theoretical debate. This exact misunderstanding has led to some of the darkest chapters in human history.
This is the tragedy of the middleman, and it's one of the most sobering and important sections in the entire book. Sowell shows this repeating pattern throughout history, where certain minority groups who specialize in finance and commerce are persecuted.
These are groups that don't necessarily, plow the fields or forge the steel, but they handle the money, the credit, the logistics.
Right. They are the shopkeepers, the moneylenders, the traders. Their economic contribution is organizational. It's about allocating resources efficiently. And because that work is often invisible, it's done in an office or a ledger book, not with a hammer. It looks to the economically illiterate like they're producing nothing. It looks like they're parasites.
And Sowell gives specific examples.
Painfully specific examples. The Jews in Europe for centuries, the Chinese diaspora throughout Southeast Asia, the Chetiars in India and Burma, the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire.
And the story's always the same.
It's a horrifically consistent pattern. These groups, because of their success in these middleman roles, become objects of envy and hatred. They get blamed for economic downturns. And eventually they are persecuted, they are violently expelled, or in the worst cases, they are murdered.
And the logic of the persecutors is, once we get rid of these parasites, our economy will finally flourish.
That's the logic. But the result is always, without fail, the exact opposite. The economy collapses. Sowell uses the example of when Idi Amin expelled the entire Asian population from Uganda in the 1970s. These were the country's shopkeepers, traders, and entrepreneurs.
And what happened to Uganda's economy?
It was utterly destroyed. It wasn't just that the shops were empty. The farmers in the countryside found that their crops were rotting in the fields because the middlemen who used to coordinate the transportation and sale of those crops were gone. The entire economic nervous system of the country had been ripped out.
That is just, it's a chilling lesson. It shows that economic ignorance isn't just about making bad policy choices. It can fuel genocide.
It really can. And it's why Sowell makes this point that sounds so cold but is so crucial. The repaying of investments is not a matter of morality, but of economics.
What does he mean by that exactly? It sounds a bit harsh.
He means that the economy is a system with rules, like physics. It doesn't care about your feelings or your moral judgments. If you don't provide a reward for sacrifice and risk-taking, people will stop sacrificing and taking risks. It's not because they're bad people, it's because they're rational. Supply vanishes. If you persecute the people who stock the shelves will go empty. It's cause and effect.
Okay, let's take a breath there, because that is incredibly heavy. I want to bring this back down to the personal level.
Yeah.
For the person listening to this right now who isn't planning an economy or persecuting a minority group, how does this apply to me?
How does it apply to you, the learner?
Yeah, and the most direct application Sowell discusses is human capital. He says that education is the ultimate form of investment as sacrifice.
This is where the whole theory becomes intensely personal. When you decide to go to college, or get a master's degree, or even just take a 6-month coding boot camp, you are the Greenwich Village artist.
How so?
You are making a huge sacrifice in the present. First, there's the direct cost, the tuition. You're giving up real resources. But the bigger cost, the one most people forget, is the time.
The foregone income.
The foregone income. For the 4 years you're in college, you could have been working a full-time job. Maybe it's not a great job, but it's an income. Let's say you could have made $30,000 a year.
So over 4 years, that's $120,000 of lost wages.
Exactly. So the true cost of that degree isn't just the $50,000 in tuition. It's the tuition plus the $120,000 you didn't earn. You are making a massive bet, a huge investment, that by sacrificing all that income and consumption now, you'll gain skills that will make you so much more productive that you'll earn it all back and more in the future.
You are trading today for tomorrow. But, and this is the big question on everyone's mind today, what if it doesn't pay off?
And there's the other crucial word of the day, risk. Investment is sacrifice, yes, but it is always, always risk.
The return is never guaranteed.
Never. Sowell is crystal clear about this. The profit, the higher salary. That's the prize you get for winning a gamble. But you can absolutely lose. You can spend 4 years and $100,000 getting a degree in a field that, it turns out, nobody wants to pay for. In that case, your investment has failed.
And this connects directly to the huge public debate we're having right now about student loans. Again, we're not taking a political side here, but just looking at the economic mechanics Sowell lays out.
Exactly. The debate over loan forgiveness is, at its core, a debate about who bears the cost of a failed investment.
Okay, explain that.
When you take out a student loan, you, the student, are the investor. You are borrowing capital to invest in your own human capital. If the investment is a success, you get a great job, your income skyrockets, you pay back the loan with interest, and you keep the massive surplus for yourself. You're the artist charging the $100.
But if the investment fails, if you get a degree that doesn't lead to a higher paying job,
then the question is, who eats the loss? Traditionally, the investor, the student, eats that loss. Just like an entrepreneur who starts a restaurant that fails has to eat the loss. The current debate is about whether that loss should be socialized and paid for by the taxpayer instead.
And to bring it back to Sowell's real things concept, he would ask, did the education actually create real value?
That's the fundamental question. A degree is an investment only if it measurably increases your ability to produce goods or services that other people are willing to pay for. If it doesn't do that, then from a purely economic standpoint, it wasn't an investment, it was consumption.
Ouch. Calling 4 years of hard study consumption sounds really harsh.
It is harsh, but the distinction is critical. If you spend 4 years reading wonderful books and expanding your mind, but you don't acquire any marketable skills, you haven't built an economic asset. You've enjoyed a very expensive 4-year intellectual experience. It might be personally enriching, and that has its own value, but economically it's in the same category as a round-the-world trip. It's something you consume, not something that pays you back.
That's a very clarifying, if difficult, way to look at it. Okay, now I want to be the devil's advocate for a
So
minute. We've
please.
been talking about investment as sacrifice this entire time. The artist 20 years, the student eating ramen, the farmer going hungry. But there's one glaring exception where this logic seems to completely fall apart.
I know exactly where you're going with this. The heir.
The trust fund baby. The person who inherits $100 million. What did they sacrifice? They didn't practice for 20 years. They didn't walk 8 miles to find a job. They were just born into the right family. How on earth does Sowell's investment sacrifice equation account for that?
It's the single strongest challenge to the theory, and Sowell doesn't ignore it. He basically concedes that from the narrow perspective of the person who inherits the money, it is unearned income. They did not sacrifice for it.
So is the theory just wrong then?
No. His defense is that you can't look at the error in isolation. You have to look at the effect on the system. You have to look at the incentives of the person who earned the money in the first place.
The parent who built the company.
Right. Why does an entrepreneur work 80-hour weeks for 40 years to build a massive enterprise? Sure, for their own comfort, but a huge, huge motivator is the desire to provide for their family, to leave a legacy for their children.
It extends their time horizon beyond their own life.
Massively. So now imagine you change the rules. You tell that entrepreneur the second you die, the government is going to take 100% of your wealth. What does that entrepreneur do?
They stop working so hard in their later years. They say, well, screw it. I'm going to sell the company, buy a yacht, and spend every last penny before I go.
They consume the capital, the factory doesn't get expanded, the new research and development doesn't happen, the jobs aren't created. Society as a whole loses the benefit of that massive pool of capital because you destroyed the incentive to preserve it.
So we permit inheritance not because the heir is morally deserving of it, but because the promise of being able to pass on wealth encourages the parent to accumulate and preserve capital in the first place.
That is the argument. It's a defense based on economic efficiency and social benefit, not on individual moral desert. But Sowell would be the first to admit this is where the cold logic of economics really clashes with our powerful, intuitive sense of fairness. It feels unfair, even if it works.
And there's one last warning we should touch on before we wrap up. We've spent a lot of time talking about the winners. HP, Edison, Ford.
The survivor bias. It's a huge cognitive trap.
Right. We see the towering skyscraper and we think, wow, investment really pays off.
Yeah.
We completely ignore the 10 empty lots around it where other buildings were started and failed.
Sowell is very clear on this. For every Henry Ford, there were thousands of other aspiring automakers who sacrificed everything and whose companies went bankrupt. We don't remember their names.
I think he mentions that something like half of all new businesses are gone within 5 years. The failure rate is brutal.
It is. And even the biggest giants can fall. Think about Kodak. They basically owned photography for a century. They were Titan, and now they're a ghost. The crucial lesson here is that investment is not a magic money printer. Your sacrifice only buys you a ticket to the game. It does not in any way guarantee you'll win.
That's a really humbling thought. You can
Yeah.
do everything right, make the sacrifice, take the risk, and still end up with nothing.
But without the sacrifice, you have a 0% chance of winning. And without millions of people making those risky sacrifices, society as a whole never gets the benefit of the few that succeed. The failures are a necessary part of the discovery process.
Okay, let's bring it all together. Let's recap. We've covered a ton of ground today.
We really have. From a sidewalk in New York to the boardrooms of India.
I think the biggest lesson is that investment, true investment, isn't about greed. It's the polar opposite. It's about refusing to consume everything today so that tomorrow can be better and more productive.
It's the farmer choosing to plant instead of ceased. It's the student in the library on a Friday night.
We learned that capital isn't just a pile of cash. The most valuable capital is human insight and the willingness to pour in sweat equity, like Ford and Edison did.
And we learned that those boring financial institutions play a vital role as the matchmakers, connecting the small sacrifices of millions to the big visions of a few.
And maybe the toughest lesson is that the returns, the profits, the dividends, are not a reward for greed. They're the necessary fuel that encourages the sacrifice and risk-taking that drives all human progress. Punish the return, and you kill the progress.
It fundamentally changes how you see the world. When you see a new business open, you don't just see a storefront. You see the culmination of years of someone's saved capital and sleepless nights.
You see the invisible 20 years. And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to take away. Sowell teaches us that capital is visible. You can see the factory, you can see the stock portfolio, but the sacrifice behind it is almost always invisible. So the next time you see a profit, or a high price that seems unfair, stop and ask yourself, what was the invisible cost? What were the 20 years of unseen sacrifice that were paid long ago to make this moment possible?
And maybe more importantly, what are you willing to sacrifice today for your own 20 years from now?
That was lesson 10 of 14 on Basic Economics, a common sense guide to the economy, 5th edition. Subscribe for the full series. If you haven't seen our debate overview of the whole book, check that out, link in the description. Thanks for being here. See you next time.